We are the Entrepreneurs Unity Group. Today I'll be discussing the American film Bubble Boy and attempting to explain it. Jimmy Livingston, the boy in question, is born completely immune to everything. He must be maintained in isolation since even a trace of infection might be fatal. Nothing he touches will not get polluted. Therefore, he will spend the rest of his life enclosed in a plastic bubble. Mrs. Livingston, the boy's mother, is extremely cautious with him. He wasn't even permitted to return to his family's care until he was 4. She and Mr. Livingston didn't bring the kid home in his bubble until he was 4 years old. The bubble in his room is similarly enormous, allowing him to stroll right inside. He can feel his parents' touch through the bubble's extended hands. Viruses and bacteria of any kind can't stand a chance inside the bubble, where all of his toys are being kept sterile. After that, Jimmy made the room his permanent residence. Mrs. Livingston is so afraid he'll escape the bubble that she always kills off the princess when she's let free at the conclusion of their bedtime story. For whatever reason, Mrs. Livingston has decided that he may only watch one television network and read one magazine. Additionally, she uses the extended arms to cuddle her kid and trim his hair. Mrs. Livingston is a radical nationalist who pushes her views on Jimmy by teaching him just those things she considers to be sensible. But since naive Jimmy can't help himself, he goes along with it. The city as a whole is aware of the peculiar bubble child, but this fame does him no good. Instead, Mrs. Livingston is always chasing away the neighborhood youngsters who come to Jimmy's house, wrap themselves in plastic wrap, and make fun of him. Jimmy only eats cooked meals. Before sending Jimmy to get his lunch, Mrs. Livingston puts it through a decontamination device housed in a plastic tube. The current age of Jimmy is 16. He describes himself as a typical youngster who is thrilled to receive an electric guitar instead of a vehicle as a gift. A girl of his age named Chloe moves into the neighborhood one day, and he happens to be looking out his window at the time. As time has passed, he has become fond of the girl but is unable to change their relationship. Moreover, he has no clue when it comes to romantic relationships or dating. In response to Jimmy's growing attraction to the next-door whore, his mother tells him the story of a kid who tragically lost his life after touching the woman. Jimmy continues to keep a close eye on Chloe from his window for the following few years, and she eventually catches on to his presence. Something is occurring to him, he says in his narration, but he has no idea what. When he wakes up with an erection one morning, he freaks out. He doesn't get the idea, so he smashes himself over the head with a bat, then calls his mom crying. To calm him down, and Mrs. Livingston walks in and has him recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Chloe's popular pals tease Jimmy by dubbing him the Bubble Guy. It appears like she is taking a stand against him. Mr. Livingston answers the door when she knocks one day. She's amazed by the network of plastic tubes that runs throughout the house. She rides the tube till it deposits her at Jimmy's room. Since his mother is the only female he has ever spoken to, Jimmy feels both surprised and anxious. Chloe initiates conversation and compliments his guitar playing. Jimmy attempts to teach her to play it with her hands outstretched. In the middle of it, he begins reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. From then on, the two had daily meetups. Their mutual acquaintance, Mrs. Livingston, does not approve of their relationship. Now watch as we cut to a montage of the two of them having fun together. On his birthday, she gifts him a guinea pig encased in a ball, and on Halloween, she invites neighborhood youngsters inside his room to trick-or-treat. On the night of her birthday, a tipsy Chloe finds a way into Jimmy's bedroom through the windows. She makes an attempt to enter the bubble, explaining that she just cannot avoid him any longer. Unfortunately, she faints before entering the building. Chloe's night at the prom suddenly comes on screen. Jimmy is heartbroken when her wicked lover Mark picks her up. Although Mark gives Jimmy a cigarette, Jimmy has no idea what it is. Jimmy looks out his window one night to witness Mark and Chloe making out. The following morning, Chloe presents Jimmy with an engagement ring in Jimmy's bedroom. Mark asked her to marry him. She has come to tell Jimmy that she and him will be getting married this weekend at Niagara Falls. Jimmy is dismayed but tries not to show it. Jimmy doesn't seem to care about the gift she gave him, which she is hiding in his decontamination tube. Instead, he returns the guinea pig and politely requests that she go. With tears in her eyes, Chloe walks away. When Jimmy finally gets around to opening the present, he finds "I love you" scrawled inside of a snow globe. His shock causes him to shout her name, and he makes the executive decision to travel to Niagara Falls in an attempt to interrupt the wedding. He puts in a lot of time and effort to create a portable bubble barrier for himself, and he succeeds. Then, without telling his parents, he sneaks out of the house. After his first successful run, Jimmy purchases a bus ticket from the attendant at the bus station. But unfortunately, Jimmy neglected to bring any cash. He's upset and tries to cross the street, but a bus runs him over. He plummets to the floor, but his bubble catches him just in time. The bus's occupants exit and offer to transport him. Jimmy embraces it enthusiastically, but soon learns that the group is a religious cult. They become angry and kick him off the bus for pointing it out. When the cult members finally reach their destination, the leader declares that the guy who has been sealed inside the globe is actually the rescuer sent from God. After realizing Jimmy was their savior, the gang sets out to find him and extract him from the globe. In the meanwhile, Jimmy encounters a biker named Slim. Jimmy breaks the news to him that the love of his life has married someone else. As a result of this, Slim brags about his former flame, Wildfire, whom he still adores. The two then travel to Niagara Falls in the car he offered Jimmy. When Mrs. Livingston returns home, she discovers that Jimmy has disappeared. Mrs. Livingston and her husband went looking for Jimmy because the police wouldn't start looking until 24 hours had passed. Meanwhile, Slim and Jimmy make it to Sin City, where they stay for a while. They had a great time in the casino, but Jimmy just has 2 days till the wedding. This prompts him to abandon Slim in the club before stealing a scooter and fleeing in disguise. After a time on the road, Jimmy spots his parents' car, and they try to persuade him to stop running. Jimmy has a mishap because he was in a rush. Fortunately, though, his bubble propels him straight into the path of a speeding train. He manages to get away from his mother, but he ends himself on a train with freak show performers. The freaks inform him that they are held captive by Dr. Freak, who puts them on display in his freak show. Jimmy encounters the dwarf doctor, Dr. Freak. By mistake, he knocks the man to the ground with his bubble, which allows the other freaks to escape. After that, he proceeds on his journey to the falls at Niagara. However, he is no longer able to operate a scooter, so he visits a local eatery in the hopes of hitching a ride. At that location, many law enforcement officials harass a guy known as Pushpop. Jimmy's admission that he lacks immunity leads them to fear he is infected and prompts them to flee the premises. As the situation escalates, Pushpop offers Jimmy a ride after the restaurant catches fire. The two of them make plans to visit Niagara Falls, and he offers to drive. Meanwhile, Mrs. Livingston manages to get in touch with Dr. Freak, who reveals that Jimmy has plans to visit Niagara Falls. She phones Chloe, fuming that she's to blame for Jimmy's flight. In the midst of her conversation with Dr. Freak, her automobile is stolen by a group of freaks. While traveling, Pushpop and Jimmy collide with a cow that has wandered into the road. Pushpop is upset since cows represent God and his faith, but Jimmy, according to his mother's promise, explains to him that his beliefs are wrong. And because of this, Pushpop abandons Jimmy in his rage. By various means, Jimmy eventually makes it to New York, where he hitches a ride from a wise old guy named Pippi. The following morning, when Jimmy comes to, the man is still behind the wheel. The automobile crashes into a billboard and Jimmy sees that Pippi is dead. Jimmy phones Chloe from inside a supermarket. When Jimmy calls Mark, Mark answers and tells him to hang up since he is getting married to Chloe in an hour. Now that he has given up, he phones his mom and begs her to come get him. His parents pick him up in their car and travel to him. Mr. Livingston questions Jimmy about his first time outside as Mrs. Livingston uses the restroom. Intimacy between a father and his son. Mr. Livingston urges Jimmy to give it his best shot. Jimmy listens to his advice and rushes to prevent the ceremony from going on. Because of this, Mrs. Livingston drives out in pursuit of her husband. Concurrently, the cult members track down Jimmy and start following him. Slim and his other bikers also arrive to save Jimmy. Slim meets the gaze of Mrs. Livingston, his long-lost sweetheart. It turns out that everyone is driving on the runway of a jet. Jimmy boards the plane with the seasoned pilot and they take off. The jet crashes on the way to Niagara Falls, plunging Jimmy into the water below. Fortunately, his bubble prevents him from sinking. He pulls himself out of the water and makes a beeline towards the ceremony. As Chloe and Mark exchange wedding vows in the chapel, Jimmy walks in and declares his feelings for her. He knows this is his final chance to convince Chloe, so he risks his life by breaking the seal on his protective bubble and kissing her. He then quickly passes out. Meanwhile, Mr. and Mrs. Livingston show there as Chloe tries to rouse him. After her husband urges her to confess the truth about her son's death, Mrs. Livingston goes into mourning. Jimmy is startled to consciousness by his mother's uncomfortable revelation that he is not ill. She had lied to him all these years to protect him from the dangers of the outside world. Jimmy is shaken up by his mother's actions, but he accepts her justification that she was trying to keep him safe. He gives in and hugs Chloe as cheers erupt around them. Let's fast forward a few months. It's official, Chloe and Jimmy are tying the knot. Everyone he's met on his travels is there. The Livingstons are now a throuple consisting of Mr. and Mrs. After saying their goodbyes, Jimmy and Chloe get in their car and drive out on their honeymoon. You can support this channel by subscribing for future updates, turning on alerts, and leaving a like on the video. To those who have been following along, thank you.